Hello, welcome back. It is a new day, a new sleigh, and a new video where I have something to say. And today we are welcoming the beautiful summer month of July. I was going to say June. June is over. The book we are going to be talking about today is a new release. It came out in June. Yet another murder mystery. As I mentioned in the last video I posted, I've been really getting into them. This was a very unexpected turn of events. So this book, without further ado, is called Looking for Smoke by K.A. COBELL, which I did mention in my book freakout tag that I did want to read this book. It was on my list, and I was in the middle of reading it when I posted that video, and I just finished it, and I had to immediately dive into this video. So, as a little bit of a spoiler-free summary, Looking for Smoke is a murder mystery, as I just mentioned. The premise of the book is meant to kind of shine a light on the MMIW movement, which stands for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women. It's been adapted to be a little bit more inclusive and include missing and murdered Indigenous people, but for this sake, we'll just say MMIW. So first, I'm going to preface the character names and say that this is specifically told from the main four characters, and each of them has their own perspective chapters as the story goes on. So we start with Mara Reset, who is a new student. So she's kind of dealing with feeling like an outsider, and specifically the three other people that we get perspectives from kind of treat her like she's an outsider, and they don't necessarily accept her as Blackfeet. Then we have from the other characters Eli Firstkill, Brody Clark, and Lauren Arnault. At the start of the story, Lauren's sister, Ray Ann, went missing 3 months prior, so she's already kind of dealing with that weight, that grief, and she and her family are very unhappy with the way the investigation has been going, and they've only just now brought in an FBI agent to help with the case. Now, Mara is kind of on the outside of this friend group. It originally starts with Eli, Brody, Lauren, and this other girl, Samantha Whitetail. So all five of these kids, again, they're like high school age. I'm going to say like 17, 16-ish. So they're all attending a powwow together. Well, not together, I guess. Like they're just all at the powwow at the same time. And Mara kind of gets roped into their friend group unknowingly because Lauren invites her to a giveaway, and they give her I believe it's like a shawl of some kind. So the reason that they do this giveaway is to honor the passing of Lauren's grandfather. And instead of everyone else giving them gifts, they express their like grief, I guess, for lack of a better term, by giving gifts to other people, and specifically giving gifts to just like welcome people. So Mara is amongst the people that receives a gift, as well as some outsiders. So these are non-native people that have come to the res. They receive gifts, as well as Eli's father, who, even though he's not there, Lauren's grandmother gifts him horses because he really helped her get through a difficult time. So the gift is just to like honor his contributions to her. So while at this powwow and after the giveaway, at some point, Samantha separates from the group. Lauren, Mara, Eli, and Brody, I'm sorry, that's a lot of characters to remember, they all go looking for Samantha, but when they can't find her, they get kind of worried. Eventually, they end up finding her body in a trailer, and she has been strangled to death. So the story follows the group as they are uncovering what happened to not only Samantha, but Lauren's sister, Rayanne. So that was the spoiler-free summary. So from now, we will be getting into more heavy spoilers, and not only that, I will preface this now. Going on from this point in the video, we will be discussing topics such as drug abuse, addiction, as well as themes of violence and femicide. So if you are sensitive to any of those topics, please feel free to click off this video. I encourage you still to read the book, because I think as I will get more into my analysis part and when it's kind of safe to come back from spoilers, there is a really great significance and a great takeaway once you finish this book. So I won't say that I don't encourage you to read it. I do. But again, if you are sensitive to any of these topics, and don't push yourself outside of your comfort zone, and don't push yourself to do something that will harm you in any way. So at the very least, we can still support the author and encourage others to read this book. But if not, feel free to click off this video, and it's okay if you don't read the book. That is my disclaimer. let us continue with the video. So after the powwow and after Samantha is found, the friend group is grieving, specifically Lauren Arnault. So at this point, as I mentioned, her sister has been missing for the past 3 months. After her sister went missing, she kind of isolated herself and she wasn't really hanging out with her friend groups as much. And at the time, Samantha was her best friend, but they weren't really talking too much. And a common theme throughout this friend group is that they really don't talk about their feelings too much or whatever's like going on in their personal lives. They're not like that kind of friend group, if that makes sense. So at this time, when Lauren is going through this grief and stress and all these things with her family, her friends don't ask her at any point how she's doing. So she's just been kind of like suffering in silence, and her friends have not reached out to her at all, and they like refuse to talk about it. So already we're having a conflict within this friend group. So after Samantha is found, they're kind of not really talking about it with each other, and honestly they're just kind of like going on with their day-to-day lives. Shortly after Samantha is found, they're holding a relay race that Eli and Brody are both participating in. Brody has an older brother, Jason, who runs their family ranch. I think he's also involved in the race in some way. If not, he like helps the two of them with the race. Honestly, the way they described it was kind of scary. There's a few sports that scare me in the world. One of them being water polo, the other being rugby, and I think the third will be these little relay races, because I didn't dare look it up on the internet because I was honestly terrified. The way I think they said it works is like, so you ride the horse, and it's like different horses. So you ride the horse and then you jump off and then jump on the other horse as fast as possible. So literally a relay race, but with horses. And then someone on the ground has to catch your horse as you like jump off. And horses scare me because they got a powerful kick. I don't live anywhere near where they have horses, but I fear getting kicked in the chest by a horse. It's almost to the same level of fear that I have of like falling into quicksand. I don't live anywhere near that has sand. I feel like when I go out into the world that I'm constantly at risk of getting kicked in the chest by a horse. Anyway, that was my tangent. As this relay race is going on, they get an alert. They got a notice that there is a fire that is spreading through the area. So Mara's dad, who works for some kind of like, I think it's like a wildlife commission of some kind, he's going out to help the teams kind of like evacuate livestock and people and all that good stuff. So he goes out, right? Okay. While Mara's dad, his name is MJ, while MJ is out in the fields, him and another person find something. The police show up at Lauren and her grandmother Geraldine's home, and they notify them that they have found Rayanne, or rather, they found Rayanne's body. Because they were going into like the fields and evacuating, and they were doing much like widespread kind of searches, and the fire had cleared some of the brush and whatever, they uncovered Rayanne's body. And they specifically say to the Arnaults that she had similar strangulation marks around her neck. So they believe that the same person that killed Rayanne killed Samantha the day before. Lauren is in shambles because at this point, the two people closest to her have now been found dead. She thinks that it's because they knew her, it's their connection to her that put them in danger. She feels an immense sense of guilt, especially because she attributes the abduction of Rayanne to her actions on the same day. When Rayanne disappeared in April, the reason and the circumstances that surrounded her disappearance, it was not Lauren's fault, but she heavily believed it was. The day prior, her and Rayanne got into an argument because Rayanne was mad at her for treating Mara so badly at school. So they had a fight and they weren't speaking to each other. And then Lauren had to go to school early the next day so she could work on a project with both Samantha and Brody. Because she left early, Rayanne had to take the bus to school. She was abducted from the bus stop. Then, before Samantha was murdered, she tried to talk to Lauren, but Lauren said, we'll talk later. I believe she went to go do a dance, and she in general was a little bit angry with Samantha as well. but she believed that if she had just went to go talk to Lauren, if she hadn't left her alone, then this would not have happened. So Lauren is really going through it. She feels a lot of guilt. She is specifically not feeling too much confidence in the local police department, because at the time when they reported Ray Ann's disappearance, the tribal police didn't really take her seriously. They believed that maybe she just ran away from home or that she would turn up eventually. They didn't take it as seriously as the Arnauds wanted them to. So Lauren is just incredibly frustrated as the story starts out. At the powwow, like immediately after they found Samantha, they questioned all the people that were there. Specifically, they were able to clear about half of the think if it was like a stadium, someone was recording, so about half of the stadium was in view, so you could see those people were accounted for. They never left, so they're immediately cleared for Samantha's murder. They questioned Lauren, Brody, Eli, Mara, some of the visitors, the non-native people that were there, and a few other people, I can't remember who. But Eli, for some reason, refuses to be questioned. He leaves immediately, saying that he has to get his younger sister Sherry to bed. So Lauren immediately thinks that that's really weird. Why didn't Eli want to be questioned? After the relay race, they are having a party to celebrate their victory, which Lauren is invited to. At this point, Lauren and Mara are the only people that know that Ray Ann was found murdered. The only reason Mara knows is because her father was the one that found her, so she told the family and they were questioned about it. Mara reaches out to Lauren and lets her know that, hey, if you need anyone to talk to, I'm here. Like, I want to lend that comforting pat on the shoulder if I can. And Lauren takes her up on the offer, surprisingly. And this is surprising for a few reasons, because as I mentioned, the friend group wasn't really nice to Mara, but amongst the most malicious of them was actually Samantha. Samantha bullied Mara very heavily, but Mara never told her family about what was happening. So she really had no reason to grieve Samantha's loss. But, she was going through a lot after, they all found Samantha. And she just wanted to kind of lend that hand as to also be hey, I'm kind of going through it. If we could just talk to each other, I think that would be great. So Lauren invites her to the party and they end up both going together. So I'm going to backtrack a little bit to before the party. Before the party, everyone gets questioned yet again. That includes Brody. Ooh, that was my finger cracking. God. Oh my God. I'm sorry. Brody, Mara, Eli, and Lauren. So when Lauren's family is brought in, they ask if Ray Ann or Samantha was involved with drugs, because there is kind of an issue with drugs in their community. So they ask if maybe she was involved with the wrong crowd, especially because, as we learned from Lauren, their mother was heavily addicted to drugs and actually left them because of it. Lauren and her grandmother are adamant that Ray Ann would never get caught up in anything like that she was very anti-drugs. But the police don't really believe her 100%. Maybe she had some secrets that she was holding from the Arnaud family. So Lauren is kind of suspicious. She's not trusting too much of these detectives. When Mara is questioned, they ask her and her father, who is there, about what happened at their previous home, because they did not live on the res this whole time. We actually find out from Mara that the reason that they had to move was because Mara was kind of not involved, but she was talking to this boy that she went to school with, and she found out that the only reason that he liked her, he was talking to her, was because he wanted to add a native girl, quote unquote, to his roster. So her dad got so angry that I'm not going to say beat up the kid, but he roughed him up kind of badly. And that kid was the son of his boss, so he lost his job, which is why they had to move. So they kind of throw a little bit of suspicion on Mara's dad, because they essentially are saying that he has a tendency for anger. So, maybe who knows. Then Brody and Jason are brought in for questioning, and they question more so Jason, and the police, specifically, this is the native police officer. His name is Detective Youngbull. He brings up that Jason has a lot of skeletons in his closet. So he's throwing a lot of suspicion on him as well. It's even weirder because Brody is I feel so guilty. And then, last but not least, Eli, he's brought in and they question him super heavily, even asking to see his hands. And they question his dad and where he is. And he's like, well, he's working, he's not here. Eli immediately gets really flustered and he leaves the questioning again. After all this is said and done, our 4 main characters, these people that we're getting like perspective chapters from, don't seem innocent. They all have something going on behind closed doors. So after all this questioning takes place, Lauren goes home. She's very upset. She's very distraught. She checks Rayanne's room, combs through everything to see if maybe she can find drugs or whatever. Just like that sinking suspicion is kind of in the back of her mind, planted there by the FBI agent. So the FBI agent, again, kind of alluded to the fact that maybe Rayanne was involved with drugs. So now Lauren is kind of doubting herself. So she combs through her room, but finds nothing. But then she gets a phone call. She looks at her phone. Who's calling her? Rayanne. Need I remind you, Rayanne was the person we just found dead a few chapters ago. Apparently, some people were, driving by the road and they saw her phone on the side of the road. So they took it home, they charged it, and called the emergency contact. At this point, again, no one knows that Rayanne was actually found dead. So she recruits Mara to go with her to pick up this phone. Because again, at this point, the FBI agent has planted seeds of doubt in Lauren's mind. So she just wants to get a look at it before the police do, so she can kind of get some closure, because again, she really doesn't trust the police at this point. Which, side note, a little bit of a side tangent, is not like uncommon in a lot of murder mysteries. I think that's always like a reasoning for why our characters will have to do the detective work by themselves, is because they don't trust the police to some degree. Honestly, like with true crime and a lot of different occurrences in the media, there's not a lot of faith in detective work, especially when it comes to like older crimes. They didn't have the same amount of technology, racism, police bias. There's a million reasons not to trust the police when it comes to investigations. But I thought this book was more unique in this kind of trope with murder mysteries because it was more personalized. They had personal reasons and experiences for not trusting the police. Again, when Rayanne went missing, the native police did not take their concerns seriously, since they were so slow to kind of start that investigation and really like taking these concerns seriously. They didn't put out the search parties fast enough. They weren't checking through Rayanne's things fast enough. They weren't checking alibis fast enough. And because they were so slow to do it, Rayanne was missing for so long, and it was only just now that her body actually turned up. And even at the powwow, that was monitored by the native police. So there were people there that were on the lookout, and yet somehow Samantha was still murdered right under their noses. So we see from Lauren's perspective that this is not only once, but twice that the police have failed to keep these women safe. So she has more of like, I'm not going to say a valid reason, because any reason to mistrust the police is a valid one, especially what we know systemically, but it's more closer to her. We see the ways that they have failed her personally, so we can kind of like empathize a little bit more with her just because it's so close to her. So her and Mara go to pick up the phone, and she's kind of scrolling through it, and at first, like, even the guys that turned in the phone were like, you guys are really sketchy. So Mara is giving them the breakdown about what happened with Rayanne, explaining that this is her phone and that they've already called the police to come pick it up. They just wanted to kind of like confirm that it was hers first and kind of give Lauren some of that closure. As Lauren is going through it, she looks in Rayanne's search history and sees that she looked up the price of fentanyl and meth. She deletes these searches from Rayanne's phone before she gives it to the police, by the way, because she's so set, she's so sure that Rayanne could not have possibly been selling or using drugs that she's like, this is just going to lead them down the wrong path. I'm just going to get rid of it. She also finds a conversation, rather the remnants of a conversation between her and Eli, because she knew, maybe they had like a little thing going on, but it was at this point unconfirmed. Both Mara and Lauren end up going to the party directly after this, but before they kind of like roll into the main festivities, Lauren is expressing that she has a lot of like doubts and suspicions about Eli. So before they go in, they break into his car. So she breaks into his car, but the only thing she finds is a box of matches and a hair tie that looks like Rayanne's. But Mara is quick to be like, that could easily be his little sister's. But she's still like, I don't trust him. Like, let's go talk to them. So they all kind of have like a confrontation, and Lauren tells both Eli and Brody that they found Rayanne's body. And again, they both look like super suspicious because they're just like, okay. But Eli leaves, and we later learn from his perspective that he leaves because he's so distraught and destroyed by the fact that they found her body that he's like crying in his car. So Eli leaves, and Brody tries to leave again, but Lauren and Brody are like closer than they appear, and we know that Brody actually has had very strong feelings for Lauren since forever. So Lauren decides that she's gonna go talk to Brody, and she leaves Mara alone at this party. While Mara is alone, she sees Eli, but he's been kind of like rude to her this whole time. She kind of leaves, she wanders off. She notices some like sketchy dude that's like very obviously selling drugs, but she ignores it, and she ends up going to the stable to see the horses and whatever. This sketchy dude follows her into the stables and is making some advances towards her that she's very uncomfortable with, and she's much more acutely aware that she's alone with him in this stable and no one knows that they're there. And homegirl is ready. She's not nervous, she's not scared. At the very least, she's not letting it show. So just as she's like reaching around to grab a shovel, Eli comes in. Yay! So he tells the dude to get lost. And there is some really good, really amazing commentary that we have here about this character and about their actions. It's a crime that it is only a small nugget of this whole story. Okay, so after they leave, it's Eli and Mara again together, and he tells her like, oh, this is one of Lauren's cousins. His name's Sterling. He's harmless. He's just drunk and whatever. And Mara's like, he tried to come on to me after I said no. What part of that is harmless? And Eli's like, well, like, I know him. We know him. He's not like that. And she was like, his actions say everything. The way he just behaved to a complete stranger speaks volumes. How could you rationalize that and say that it's harmless? And he's like, okay, maybe you're right. He's experiencing a lot of cognitive dissonance because he's like, well, this is somebody I know. I know that they would never cross this line, but the fact that they're flirting so close with it is problematic, and it is bad behavior, especially because, and I didn't mention it earlier, but Eli and Mara actually had an interaction prior to this where she gave him a ride to the relay race, and he was scolding her, like honestly scolding her for picking up someone on the side of the road. He was like, you can't do that. As someone, as specifically as a woman driving alone, you can't pick up random people on the side of the street. And she was like, but I know you. We go to school together. He's like, that doesn't matter. And they specifically cite in the story the Highway of Tears. The Highway of Tears is a stretch of road, I believe. I get literally it's a highway. There's been a lot of people that have been abducted, specifically Indigenous women that have been abducted and murdered alongside this road. And it's called the Highway of Tears as kind of like an allusion to the Trail of Tears, which if you don't know what the Trail of Tears is, then I'm so sorry to tell you, but our education system has failed you. But it was called the Trail of Tears because this was like the trail that the Indigenous people were forced to walk as they were being forcefully removed from their homes and forced into these reservations, where a lot of people died, were murdered. A lot of horrific things happened to the Indigenous people. So he has already told her about the dangers of, just kind of interacting with people, especially alone and being a woman. So for him to say this on one hand and then not be able to recognize the danger that she was just in, like it causes a lot of cognitive dissonance for him. After this moment, he's a lot softer with her. He offers her his sweater. Eventually, Lauren takes Mara home and the party ends. Everything is good. Everything is fine. The next day after the party, the police come to Jason and Brody's ranch, and they come with a warrant to search Jason's car because new eyewitness testimony puts his truck, which is very specific, a blue Ford F-150. I'm sorry, I don't know cars. He has a blue truck, which they say there's only 2 blue trucks, and my battery's dead. Sorry, had to take a bit of a mini break, I went to go get a coffee and a Korean corn dog. So I asked for a dirty chai, and it was funny because, hold on, I don't know if you can tell. So this is my cup, right? They wrote dirty on the lid, and as a joke, I turned to my boyfriend and I was like, do you see what they fucking call me? So I left off. We were talking about the car. Okay, so the police just got a warrant to search Jason's car because eyewitnesses put his car at the bus stop where Rayanne was abducted. His original alibi was that he was at work, but when they looked into like the records, I guess his boss said that he didn't show up until like much later than what he said he did. So they got a warrant to check his vehicle. And Jason is all like chill, and he goes to Brody and he's like, dude, you need to relax. Like, you're freaking out and it looks so much worse when you freak out. It's fine. I have nothing to hide. Then later that day, Mara's dad meets with a lawyer, and the lawyer essentially is like, the police have nothing on you. Like, you guys are fine. Your alibi checks out. There's people that can verify where you were. Like, you guys are fine, essentially. And Mara's like, why do we need a lawyer? But her dad's like, oh, it's just for safety, you know, just for precautions. And she's like, okay, fine. Also, her and Eli are now texting much more casually now. The next day, they take Jason in for questioning, and to kind of like keep his mind off it and keep him occupied, Brody decides to go fishing. On the way there, he stops for a milkshake. As he's getting the milkshake, he's like, someone comes up to him and is like, hey, like, where's your brother? I've been trying to get into contact with him. Anyway, he's just like talking to him about like ranch stuff, and Brody is super distracted because he sees the visitor that was at the powwow, right? So Brody notices the visitor, and he specifically notices him kind of like checking out another girl, like a teenage girl, because earlier at the party, some girl that was also questioned at the powwow that is not like in their direct friend group told Brody, Eli, and the rest of them that she gave a statement to the police saying that he noticed that this visitor, his name is Andrew, I believe, was watching Samantha in line at concessions at some point and was being really weird about like kind of like checking her out in a way. It's very like creepy. So Brody notices the visitor doing it again. And he's like, oh no, this is weird. So he immediately decides, I'm not going fishing. I'm actually going to follow this man. So he follows him to some like camping grounds. Brody goes inside to like the main offices or whatever. Brody notices that they have a sign-in book on the front desk, right? He takes the guest book and checks the entries. So Brody goes back to his friends, Eli, Mara, and Lauren, okay? And he shows them the guest book, which when he flipped back to April when Rayanne went missing, the signature of the visitor lines up to the day before Rayanne went missing. Brody doesn't think it's a coincidence, and he convinces everyone to stake out the campgrounds to see if he does anything fishy. The next day, early in the morning, they go to the campgrounds and they're kind of watching him to see if he does anything, and they see him like leave the campgrounds at some point, and he goes to like some kind of breakfast spot, or just like he goes to a spot, right? And at first they think like he's about to do something, but then it turns out he's just cheating on his wife. So that lead kind of goes dead. They don't really find anything else about him, so they just decide to go home. When Lauren goes back home, the police officer, Detective Youngbull, is there waiting for her. And he specifically says that the visitor, Andrew, had an alibi that put him states away. Lauren is like, oh, he has to be lying because we know his signature is in that guest book the day before Rayanne went missing. Her grandma, Geraldine, is throwing heavy suspicion on both Brody and Eli. She's like, they're acting weird. Don't talk to them about the investigation and stuff. Like, don't get involved with them. Now, Lauren is still feeling kind of sus, and she's feeling like really like hopeless, especially with the way that the investigation is going. So she comes clean and tells the detective that Eli was actually late to class on the day Rayanne went missing. Apparently, he was some kind of like teacher's assistant or something of that nature, and this specific teacher allowed him to come late to school frequently, but she wouldn't mark it on the attendance sheet. So when they pulled up his records originally, it showed that he was in class, but as we learned from Lauren, he actually didn't come until later in the day. Late that night, Eli comes over to Mara's house to talk. He has a lot of stress, again, because he is essentially taking care of his younger sister. His whole life kind of revolves around her, and he just has a lot of things like inside. And Mara is someone who is like, you know, lending an ear. She allows him to talk more about like his feelings and how things are affecting him. And specifically, they grow a relationship because she believes that he's innocent, where it feels like even his own friends don't really think he is. So they're getting like super close, and they like almost kiss. But Mara's dad barges in. Homeboy is mad, like mad. So he immediately tells Eli to go kick rocks, which he does. Once Eli goes home, he notices that Brody is there. And at first he freaked out because he was like, oh my God, is my dad home? Has he been home this whole time and I wasn't here? But no, it's just Brody. And they're kind of talking because he's saying like he's really worried about Jason. But their conversation ends very like abruptly. Brody's trying to reach out, but Eli's just like not there emotionally. So he's just like, yeah, whatever. Okay. And then he leaves. The next day, Mara has a fight with her dad because he's kind of like grilling into her about being outside with Eli alone when there's obviously a killer on the loose. And she's like, listen, I would love to talk to you about my personal life, but the last time I did, we had to move. So maybe contemplate your anger issues before you come talk to me. So then she goes over to Eli's house. They're going to have like a cute little date. But as she's pulling up, she sees some flashing lights. She thinks the worst. She's like, oh my God, what happened? Where's the ambulance? Blah, blah, blah. No ambulance, only police cars. You want to know why? Eli has been arrested and they're taking him away in handcuffs. So a little bit later, Lauren figures out that Eli has been arrested based on the tip that she gave to Detective Youngbull. So she goes over to Brody's house to try and convince him to turn in the guest book because she knows that that will throw suspicion on the visitor, because she does feel guilty. I mean, she's known Eli for a long time, and even though she is suspicious about some of the actions and some of the like things he's done since Samantha was murdered, she's still like not too happy about him getting arrested. And Brody straight up didn't want to turn in the book because he was just happy to have someone else be like thrown under the bus instead of Jason, because he was really like cracking under the pressure. He was really like nervous, and that was the original reason that he went after the visitor in the first place, was so that they can find some kind of evidence to clear Jason. In Eli's perspective, as he's getting questioned by the police, he is nervous. We immediately know that something's off and that he's hiding something. As he's getting questioned more and more by police, it comes to light that Eli's father has not been working this whole time. Instead, he actually left his children in early April. Up until now, Eli has been telling everyone that he's been getting clean, but he's just been working so tirelessly so that he could provide for his children, and that's why no one has seen him around. When in the reality, he actually just deserted them, he abandoned them, and Eli has been trying to cover it up this whole time by taking care of Sherry and dropping her off at school every morning, which is why he was late the day Rayanne went missing. So he's cleared, but since he had to come out and say that they don't actually have a parent in the household, Sherry is forced to go into foster care. It's so heartbreaking. It's so sad. Everything that Eli worked so hard for the last 4 months or 3 months, I guess, just kind of like crumples away. There's a build up throughout the story where, yeah, like you're suspicious of Eli and like the things he's doing isn't really adding up, because like a lot of the characters alluded to it, especially like Lauren and Brody, that like, oh, he seems much more like reserved even before when his dad was around, but he was like very heavily addicted to drugs. He is like, they notice that he's off, but they just don't know how to reach out to him. So you just see someone that is like desperately needing help, and then like he's forced to come out with this, like not of his own accord, but just so that he can clear his name. And in doing so, he has to like give up his sister, and it's really sad. After Eli is released, he immediately goes to Brody's house because he's convinced that Brody is the one that tipped off the police. And he's equally angry with him because he's like, you had every opportunity to turn in the guest book. If you did, there would have been suspicion on another person. They would have released me, but you didn't. And this is when Brody comes clean and he says that he actually forged the signature of the visitor. He erased an entry that was in April that lined up to when Rayanne was abducted, erased that signature and replaced it with the visitor's. He forged it so that he could convince the group to like, you know, go investigate and try and find evidence on this guy. He was so desperate to have anyone else get thrown into like under suspicion by the police instead of Jason. The only other evidence that the police had on Eli was that when they searched his truck, Now, granted, it wasn't his specifically. He has two. He drives like a white truck, and then he also has like an orange one. But the orange one is like broken down. It doesn't actually work. But when the police searched that orange truck, they found Rayanne's sweater in the back seat. So now, knowing that Eli is innocent, and the police now know that his dad went missing in early April, sometime before Rayanne disappeared, they think that maybe he had something to do with it. But Eli is convinced that someone planted Rayanne's sweater in that car. There's a lot of revelations in these next few chapters. It's really weird because Mara's dad is like oddly super relieved that Eli was arrested. And then once he was released, she's like, listen, I told you so. I knew he was innocent. You guys suck. That night, Mara goes over to Eli's house and they kind of talk about it. And Mara is throwing heavy suspicion on Eli's dad. And Eli does the same with Mara's dad. And they're just both kind of like going at it a little bit. But she ends up kind of staying the night with him because he expresses that like he doesn't want to be alone now that his sister isn't there anymore. They go through the tag on social media. And they go through a tag under Indian Days where people were posting photos from the powwow and like the events that happened in years prior. When Mara goes through the tag, she sees a picture that someone took where you can see Brody in the background looking off into Samantha's direction, like where she walked off towards. Brody said that he didn't see where Samantha went to, but in this photo it looks as if he sees her exactly as she's walking away, so his statements don't really add up. Lauren goes over to Brody's house and she shows him the photo and says that like it looks as if you're lying, like what's happening here? He kind of comes out and he says that it was his fault that Rayanne was abducted. It goes back to them having to go early to school to finish a school project. They were supposed to do it the night before Rayanne was abducted, but the reason Brody didn't do homework, he said that he had something important to do on the ranch and he couldn't do it that night, so they had to go in the very next morning. But the reason he flaked out on doing the project was because he was playing video games with his brother. There had been kind of a distance between him and Jason, and this was the first time that he was like, acting like a big brother. This was the first time he was acting normal in a really long time. So he just didn't want to ruin that moment that he was having with his brother, which is why he said that he couldn't do the homework that night and the reason they had to go to school early the next morning. If he had gone to Lauren's house to finish the project, then she wouldn't have had to leave Rayanne alone the next morning and, maybe it wouldn't have happened. So Lauren is like pissed with him, and I think like to some degree she understands it's not like specifically his fault. I mean, like, yes, he made some decisions that like indirectly led to what happened. It kind of like, it led to the setup for what happened, but she's still like angry and she's going through it. She's grieving still, right? That same night, okay, at Mara's house, she's doing her thing, she's having fun, right? Whatever. She's at home and she hears banging on her front door, and it's the police, and the police have come with a warrant for her dad's arrest. Okay, because apparently her dad, MJ, lied about working in the office the day Rayanne went missing, and he was actually out working in the fields. And not only that, but they found a photo. They were tipped off to this photo of MJ. So he was outside of the arbor when he was supposedly, like, he said that he was still inside and he hadn't left. So that was like his alibi. But you can see him leaving, and he's specifically looking over at Mara and, Samantha, Lauren, and everyone. As he's getting taken away by police, he tells Mara, like, I promise I didn't do anything. I wanted to see you hanging out with your friends because I didn't know you had any. And then he gets arrested. Mara goes to tell Lauren what happened with her dad, and Lauren apparently wasn't the one who tipped off the police. So to that respect, I don't think we ever find out who really tipped them off about her dad. It was apparently under the same tag that Mara was looking at, so I'm not sure. And they're kind of talking about how like it's unfortunate that they don't have any pictures to reference when it comes to Rayanne versus like this event where it was like, heavily documented. There was a lot of people taking pictures, videos, all that kind of stuff. But then Mara suddenly remembers. She recalls seeing Lauren's Snapshare page, specifically the very last photo that she uploaded. And it's a photo of the school, like they're in the parking lot or whatever, and you can see Brody leaving the parking lot and coming back to the school, which shows that he left at some point during that school day. Mara goes over to Eli's house and she's like, dude, something's not right. Why is he lying? He left the day Rayanne went missing. And Eli is just like, I can't get down with it being Brody. He just really can't throw any kind of sus on him. So they kind of get into an argument about that. So at this point, Lauren has had so much information. She's gone through like so much questioning, seeing her friends get arrested, questioned. She's at her breaking point. So when she goes home that day, she finally cracks and she tells her grandma everything that's happened, everything that she's uncovered, and together they decide, like, you know what, the police haven't done anything for us. We have to solve this ourselves. We cannot rely on them anymore after they failed us time and time again. We have to get to the bottom of this. The very next day, Lauren decides she is going to confront Brody and try to find this evidence. She was supposed to tell Mara to go with her, but she decides to go alone. Mara is like freaked out. She's like, girl, this is not a time for us to be alone at any given point. So she immediately goes to recruit Eli, but he's still really apprehensive and he can't get down with the idea of Brody being like anyway involved in this. She gets frustrated and she just ends up leaving. At Brody's house, Lauren goes through his phone. She like gave him some kind of diversion so that whatever he would leave his phone there. She goes through it and takes pictures of the last calls that he made on the day that Rayanne went missing. And then she goes into his closet and she sees something poking out. And when she yanks it out, it's Rayanne's backpack. Oh. So now we're in Mara's perspective. She barges into Brody's house. So she stumbles upon Brody's room and she looks in the crack and she sees Brody and he's covered in blood. She immediately thinks the worst. She's like, oh my God, he killed Lauren. They have a struggle. She's fighting hard against him. He is trying to choke her out. He is literally about to kill her. Then we quickly switch to Eli's perspective. Against his better judgment and against his like apprehension, he decides to go after Mara. He's like, you know, even if nothing happens, I'd rather be safe than sorry. So he goes to Brody's house. He stumbles upon the scene, sees Brody choking the life out of her. Before he can even jump into action, Mara has grabbed a dumbbell and smacks it against the side of his head and like disorients him completely. Eli at this point, you know, they have like a non-relationship relationship, so he sees red. He immediately goes after Brody, punches the life out of him. Shortly after, the police arrive on the scene. Brody is taken away in handcuffs. Mara is taken to the hospital. They cannot find Lauren. Now we are in Brody's perspective. Oh my God. Brody swears up and down that Jason was the one that killed both Rayanne and Samantha. He says that he just like walked in on the scene and like he wasn't involved. But then the police say that Jason was found murdered as well. Their working theory is that Brody was somehow involved in the murders of Samantha and Rayanne, but once he saw that Jason had also killed Lauren, the love of his life, he lashed out and he killed Jason. So we're switching back and forth. So right now I'm just going to focus on like the main things that we uncovered. Jason went after Rayanne, and apparently the morning that Brody went to school to work on the project, he was asking questions about Rayanne to like figure out whether or not she would be alone that morning. Once Brody gave him this information, Jason went to go pick up Rayanne and he killed her. At some point that day, Jason told him that he needed to switch cars with Brody, which is why he was pictured leaving school that day. Then later, Jason reveals that in the back seat of the car is Rayanne's body, and he said that it was an accident, that he accidentally ran her over, but now that Brody was driving around with her body, that he would be an accessory and he was now involved and he had to help him no matter what. Jason got Brody to take Rayanne's body and dump it in the middle of nowhere, get rid of her phone, and, you know, just dispose of the evidence. When he went to get rid of Rayanne's body, he noticed that she wasn't dead. He admits that when he noticed that Rayanne was alive, he took his jacket and smothered her with it because he thought that she was beyond saving. The FBI agent, because it's the FBI agent that is questioning him, is visibly angry because he's like, you could have stopped at any time. You could have saved her. You could have called for help. You could have done so many things that didn't have to result in Rayanne dying. But he is just so like not okay mentally that he thought he was doing her a favor. He is technically going down for the murder of Rayanne, accessory to murder for Samantha, and murder for Jason. As Mara is in the hospital recovering, she actually reunites with Lauren. It turned out that she was all right. She was found by her grandma and the search party. Brody stumbled upon her with Rayanne's backpack, and they kind of stumbled. Lauren also hit him with a dumbbell, and he like essentially collapsed onto her, and she hit her head on his desk, which is why like there was so much blood, but she managed to escape and started running. At some point, she collapsed from the blood loss. At this point, the story is almost over. We still have so many questions. We don't necessarily understand why Jason might have done this. Brody alludes and he has like some assumption, but it's still like pretty much unconfirmed because he wasn't involved. His brother might have been involved in drugs, like specifically selling drugs, because he said that when his father owned the ranch, like it wasn't making a lot of money. They were struggling a lot financially. And he just assumed that Jason was like a better businessman, and that's why they were making so much money. So he had a suspicion that Jason was selling drugs, and it was probably something that had to do with that, which was the reason that he killed Rayanne and Samantha. The book ends with a chapter, and I forgot to mention this earlier, but along with the 4 perspectives of the characters that we're reading from, there are also these chapters where we don't know who the narrator is. They're narrated by an unknown. In this unknown perspective, we see the same day that they discovered Brody and, Eli and everyone, like they're all fighting and stuff, we see a different perspective. And this perspective is from the person that goes to the barn to confront Jason before he died. This person holds a rifle to Jason and essentially gets him to spill everything. Apparently, Rayanne witnessed a very big drug deal between Jason and another person, and she stole his merchandise. He says she stole like $10,000 worth of drugs, which would kind of explain why she looked up the cost of drugs and why that was on her search history. Then when Jason went to, kind of confront her and try to get the drugs back, she said that she flushed them all down the toilet, and he was so angry that he strangled her. 3 months go by. He's essentially forced Brody to be an accessory to the murder, and up until this point he thought his drugs were gone, but then he figures out that the whole time Samantha's had them. So that night at the powwow, when she was going to talk to Lauren, she was going to tell her about having the drugs. That night, Jason also confronts Samantha to try and get them back. She's saying like, you can have them, I won't say anything, like please just take them and go. Jason can't accept that, and he assumes that she's used it at some point and that like some of it is gone. So in a rage, he kills Samantha as well. As he finds out, the drugs haven't been touched at all. None of them were flushed away. None of it was used. All of it was still there. So the narrator confronts Jason on his greed and like specifically calls him out because he senselessly killed 2 young girls all for money, and it like in the grand scheme of things, it's just like it's so senseless, the violence that he enacted and like the shattering of these 2 families, and all for what? So the book ends with the narrator killing Jason, and we find out that our narrator is none other than Geraldine Arnault, Lauren's grandmother. Initially, upon reading this and finishing the book, I hadn't gotten to the author's note, but just after reading it, I immediately noticed like some of the explanations for Jason's motivations, Brody's motivations, like all that stuff. It's definitely left towards the end. Normally it's like a kind of slow build up. You get the explanation and then like a little bit of an epilogue kind of. I had a little bit of questions afterwards. Specifically, I was like, okay, in what circumstances did Rayanne witness this? How was she able to steal the drugs? Then from there, how did she give the drugs to Samantha, or how did she get a hold of them? Like there was a lot of questions that I was still left with after finishing this book. So after thinking about it for a while, and especially after reading the author's note, I wrote down some of my thoughts, so I'm gonna be reading them a little bit. This book, although a murder mystery, is not meant to be a puzzle. It's not a story that asks the reader to become a true crime detective or attempt to guess the killer based on the clues laid out for us, because the murderer and their motive is not the focus. Frankly, it almost doesn't matter. Instead, the book forces us to go beyond the mystery and ask a simple question: why? Why were the complaints and the concerns of the Arnault family not taken seriously? Why do Indigenous women experience violence at disproportionate rates compared to their white counterparts? Why doesn't the media broadcast these stories more? Why don't the police do more? Why don't we do more? These are questions that have no easy answer. Because as we know from discourse surrounding Black Lives Matter, the root of these issues are systemic. Police bias, media bias, and a lack of awareness perpetuate these issues, which is why solidarity amongst our communities is so crucial. And it starts with becoming aware. This book is fictional. These characters are not real, and yet this story is. The story of too many people taken by violence and their families that are left behind without justice. The ending of this book shows us that violence is senseless, that there is never a rationale for taking a life, and there are always consequences. When Geraldine kills Jason, she feels horrified but relieved. And even though the immediate danger is gone, the story is not wrapped up. The community still faces problems with drugs and more people that are willing to kill for them. But the book ends with a call to action, and with it brings hope. Should we choose to hear these stories, actively seek out the experiences, and uplift the voices of Native people, then we have every possibility for hope. As more people become aware and demand action, refusing to let a single victim dissipate into smoke, then maybe we might see a world with less violence. Or at the very least, we can start to create a world that refuses to look away from it. This book fiercely challenges the reader and other people that consume murder mystery content and challenges us on our expectations. This book stands out from the rest because it reminds us that this is real. It doesn't necessarily condemn other murder mystery books and, kind of like points out that they focus more on the puzzle adventure aspect of it, but it definitely forces us to question our own expectations based off the other books that come before it. Because this book, as I mentioned previously, doesn't necessarily wrap up perfectly. Not everything makes sense, and it's not supposed to. Because as I mentioned, this book is fictional. But this story isn't. There are so many people out right now that their stories have not ended perfectly. There's nothing to wrap it up. There's no culprits, no evidence, and no justice. This book asks of the reader to become aware, to refuse to look away from these stories and from these senseless acts of violence. In a note to the reader, I believe it's the curative director or someone from the Heartdrum imprint of HarperCollins, which this book is published under, they ask us to consider how many books we've read from Native people. And personally, this is my first one. And I've not specifically gone out of my way to never read a book from a Native person. But as I've mentioned in some of my other videos, at some point, especially, during my higher education, as I was challenged more on my thought process and implicit biases, I looked at my bookshelf and I asked myself, how many stories do I have from people of color, from diverse voices? And thinking about my bookshelf then and looking at it now, I see a drastic difference. And it all started with becoming aware, with noticing what was missing and trying to fill that gap. And this is exactly what this story is asking us to do as the reader. Because even as much as we hope for change and we hope for better systems and better resources for people affected by violence, it starts with simple changes. It starts with awareness and seeking out and actively looking for voices of the people that are oppressed. After hearing from these people, after hearing these stories, hopefully, it'll push you to action. And with that, that is the end of the video. I think I had a much better way of ending this video, but I forgot to press record on my initial monologue, so I'm really angry right now. I ended this with the finesse of a TED Talk, but I forgot to press record. Oh my God, I was so devastated. Okay. You already know I'm gonna give this book a 10 out of 5. It completely exceeded my expectations. It completely redefines the murder mystery genre, and I love it so much. I love how it really takes our expectations and kind of turns them on their head. It's so good. I love this book so much. I can't recommend it enough. Please be sure to check out the author, K.A. COBELL. This was her debut novel, if you can believe that. Debut. It was so good. Anyway, be sure to check her out on social media. She also has her own author page, which if you visit, you can get more information on the MMIW movement and some donation links as well. I will be making a donation for this video, but please do not feel as if you have to. You're definitely not obligated to. As I've mentioned with my whole theme and message of this video, talking about these issues is just as important. So interacting with Native people and kind of like spreading their stories and uplifting their voices is, you know, making an effort, and it does do much more than you think it does. Be sure to follow me on all my social media at Variations of Listen to Kristen on Instagram, TikTok, and now I have a Twitter. My Twitter is mainly just like trash posts. There's so many things I want to say, and it's like literally just like random thoughts, and I was afraid I was bothering too many of you guys on the community tab, so it's on my Twitter if you want to see it. I recently posted a live tweeting session of my read of Icebreaker. Spoiler alert, it wasn't good. Like, how did I mess up that badly? How am I that much of a boofus? Oh my god, I can't believe myself. Anyway, I need to go take a break before I have a mental breakdown.